Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
Welcome to the 905er. It has been a whirlwind couple of months in Ontario politics. In breakneck speed, the Doug Ford government has pushed through legislation that will reshape the physical nature of our province, as well as the relationship between Queen's Park and the municipalities of the 905 in Ontario at large. The More Homes Built Faster Act will carve up the Greenbelt and hand it over to developers, while at the same time potentially crippling municipalities by denying them badly needed revenues to meet the needs of those new developments. It is an act, like most of the laws passed by this government, that has angered the province. From grassroots organizations to environmentalists to municipal governments, there doesn't seem to be a group in this province that is on board with the act, aside from developers, of course. One of the organizations which has come out in opposition to Bill 23 is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, or AMO, as it is more affectionately called. AMO is the body through which the province and municipalities are able to interact and address the complex needs and interests of the towns, villages, and cities which make up the places that we live. AMO has publicly stated that municipalities stand to lose up to $5 billion a year in development fees from the bill, along with the untold cost to potential flooding or other disasters down the road due to the stripping of powers from conservation authorities. As this law potentially reshapes the relationship between municipalities and Queen's Park for the foreseeable future, we reached out to AMO to invite them on to give in detail about their position on Bill 23 and what the impact could be on the places we live over the next few years. Today we are joined by Amber Crawford, a senior policy analyst with AMO, to join us on the podcast. Okay, let's thank Amber Crawford of the Association of Municipalities for Ontario for coming on the podcast today. Thank you, Amber, for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on the 905er.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Let's dive into it. For our listeners who are not familiar with the phrase AMO means, could you just tell us what is AMO's role and purpose in the province of Ontario?
Absolutely. So AMO, for those that don't know, was actually established in 1899, so quite a number of years ago. It was to establish regular meetings between the province and the municipalities even back then. It's gone through some iterations, but has been known as AMO since 1982. It's unique in Canada from other provincial and territorial organizations in the sense that it has a signed memorandum of understanding with the government of Ontario, and we're nonpartisan, and so it's been enshrined in the Municipal Act since 2005, and it's very important to us. We're nonprofit, nonpartisan. We represent all the interests of the 444 municipal governments. Another fun fact is the City of Toronto has its own act, and so is not a member, but we work very close in tandem with them on a variety of different files. But a bit of fun facts about the membership itself. There are about 60% of our members that have less than 10,000 in population. And of those, a large percentage, so 186 of those have less than 5,000 in population, so quite small. We've got 32% that have between 10,000 and 900 or 99,999 in population, and then about just under 10 have over 100,000 population. Geographically, we also span long distances. From Windsor to Kenora is a 17-hour drive, or about 1,600 kilometers, and Toronto to Moosonee is about a 12-hour flight. So as you can imagine, anything that we do province-wide, we work on common challenges. We advocate to the province and sometimes to the federal government about things that commonly affect our residents, and provide advice to the government. And housing is obviously one of those top issues at the moment.
Speaking of housing, my understanding is AMO seems pretty united in your position on Bill 23, which is the Building More Homes Faster Act, which was recently passed at Queen's Park. Can you give us what AMO's official position is on Bill 23, just so we're all on the same footing going forward?
Sure. So first and foremost, we do agree that there is an urgent crisis in housing supply and housing affordability. We think the province's goal of building 1.5 million homes in 10 years or by 2031 is a laudable one. The bill is obviously substantive. It had made changes to about 10 different acts. And the changes, some of them we saw that were positive, and we can speak to those. We felt like they did get some right. And then there are a series of sort of comments and buckets or themes, if you will, that I take you through in terms of what those united positions are. I mean, one is the changes that were made to the finances piece really makes it harder for municipalities to recover costs associated with growth. And so that includes development charges, but also parkland dedication, community benefit charges. So it's, again, all of these things have sort of sub-items, and as a policy wonk, I'll try not to, I'll keep it high level if I can. So there's the finance piece. The land use planning piece in terms of what a community's livability looks like has also been quite impacted. Things about certain upper tier municipalities have a reduced role, as do conservation authorities. And so there's questions around what that looks like in the new world, especially given the previous bills that preceded these, including Bill 109 that just came out in the spring. And then finally, the environmental impacts. So more changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, which we had just sort of landed on some new changes, but also on the Planning Act in a time when really municipalities are seized with climate change, mitigation and adaptation. There are concerns that this bill diminishes the role for us to have the ability to protect the environment. So that's an overview, but happy to take additional questions on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think let's dive into some of the detail of some of these, because certainly the development charges piece has got kind of the most attention in the media, and that part of the story has kind of reached the public fairly well. On the parkland and community benefits side, community benefits are traditionally a way in which municipalities kind of do a deal with a developer to say, okay, you can have this if you give us that. So what's changing there with the parkland piece and the community benefits piece?
So the way that it's sort of devised is that there are costs associated with building generally, and so we call them like sort of developer related charges that are changing and exempting certain types of buildings. And so it just means that costs normally that would be attributed to developers or a growth paying for growth will now not happen. And so there are two choices for municipalities, either to sort of reduce the service level or to cover it through their own sort of property taxes.
Okay. So and in essence, I mean, there's been some more information coming out in the last sort of 24 hours, particularly with regard to Toronto, as I understand it. But in essence, this is a cost that were previously paid by developers, by the people who, and ultimately by the people who will buy houses, and now being downloaded onto cities to pay. I mean, those costs still have to be paid. So if the developer doesn't pay them, if the home buyer doesn't pay them, then we, the taxpayer, have to pay them. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, I think it's certainly part of the costs associated with building fire halls, community centers, places that really truly make some place to live, work, and play attractive to its residents. There are costs that are borne in terms of hard and soft infrastructure. So those conversations are happening. I mean, I will say, to your point, in the last 24 hours, we also received a letter on November 30th from the minister, from Minister Clark, which was welcomed news to suggest that there was going to be municipalities were going to kept whole on that funding, and that there should be, quote, no funding shortfall for housing enabling infrastructure as a result of Bill 23, provided municipalities achieve and exceed their housing pledge levels and growth targets. And so those also came out a few weeks ago, and they sort of determined the sort of, I'd say about 29 large municipalities and where those housing targets are going of those 1.5 million. So lots to digest, but as you say, it's a lot of things are shifting.
On that note, when we're talking about the story now is Toronto shortfall is going to be covered by a third of the province. A province will cover a third of Toronto's budget shortfall, and it sounds like they're looking to extend that to other municipalities affected by this. Kind of taking a step back, though, is this now a structural change that we need to embrace? That are you expecting this will be the case for every fiscal year going forward, that the province will have to step in and basically bail out municipalities in terms of their operating shortfalls going forward?
So one key difference is that the Toronto letter is separate from the AMO letter in that way, so it doesn't have the same commitment, for one. But for two, I think the the intent that municipalities are sort of putting forward is that we want to be at the table. We want to build housing. No one is saying that we're not part of the game. I just think it's the idea that everyone has a role to play, all three levels of government and the development industry. And so in terms of what we're bringing forward, I mean, we've put forward a blueprint in February, which brings up about 90 recommendations from all levels of government and the development sector about how we can improve these things. So while the finance piece is obviously an important one and top of mind, certainly as municipal councils get sworn in for the first time for many of them and start working on their budgets, that's sort of a short-term piece, but there's much more to this bill too. And as I say, the preceding bill and the other housing supply action plans.
So, it sounds almost like the relationship between the province and municipalities is really being redefined going forward on this. Housing it's such a complex and huge issue, and there's no.
That's right.
There's so many ways you can approach it and solve it, and I agree that all these people need to be brought to the table. And I'm wondering, what's the province's response to that? Because quite frankly, I think what AMO's proposing is kind of where this should have been done in the first place. Everybody at the table, how do we solve this massive policy, fiscal, resource problem in our province? And this hasn't happened. I'm wondering, what is the province's response to your proposal?
So the response so far has been the letter in response, which we again appreciate. In terms of the broader conversation, I think this has stemmed much before Bill 23. I think it's something that we've really tried to cement a collaborative relationship. And so being obviously not the province, we are responsible for implementing bills that they come up with. And so what we're really trying to do is implement it in a way that supports our municipalities and the residents that quite frankly elect them. There are quite a few across the province, and so individual municipalities are putting forward their own comments about what the province can do to help. But at this point, I think recognizing that the bill has passed, we're really focused on working with conservation authorities and other people across the province to make sure that the changes that are being implemented are done in an effective way as much as possible and are keeping municipalities as whole as possible.
I mean, obviously the position that the AMO is in is you have to be diplomatic to an extent. I mean, you're there to put your case, but the act is now an act. It's no longer a bill, and you have to live with it. But I just want to put the sort of point to you. I mean, there's a couple of things that have seemed to us to be sort of regular problems with the development process that the provincial government has at no point attempted to address. Like everything they do appears to be to reduce, they would perhaps call it red tape, whatever you want to call it, reduce the kind of regulatory oversight that can delay development, but not to put any kind of pressure in other areas to encourage developers to actually develop. And so, we have a huge number of delays are caused by appeals to what was the LPAT, what was the OMB. And I always think it's like, well, maybe if the official plans, which are after all official and which are approved by the province and by upper tier municipalities, if we just stuck to whatever they say and didn't appeal against them, then everything would be built much faster. I mean, the fact is we waste years of time in appeals to I can't even remember what it's called this week. What used to be LPAT?
The Ontario Land Tribunal.
There we go, yeah.
The OLT.
It's changed so often that I struggle to keep up.
You're doing well. You're doing well. I mean, I think the one positive that we saw in terms of that land tribunal was an increased capacity to clear the backlogs. That's certainly been something that we in our blueprint had requested. This idea that obviously COVID has really impacted the caseload already. That's certainly something to work towards. I think in terms of what developers can do, talking about what a complete application means and standardizing that, and putting it to the developers to stick to similar timelines that municipalities have been asked to do is one. Another area that we've been advocating for is that line ministry, so the province itself works on sort of a one window approach, or making it so that it's easier for the planning and development approval process to come from start to finish faster across all things. And I think it's just the premise that the onus is on municipalities to speed up processes that we're not ultimately responsible for, is obviously a piece of the puzzle, but we're looking forward to next year to working on what those other pieces could look like.
Do you think, the implication of all of this is that it's the municipalities that are the barrier here? This is the implication that I take from everything that the province has done. That the municipalities are just delaying, they're too slow, they don't like change, they're run by NIMBYs or whatever. Therefore, we've got to get all that out of the way. And the fact that it's democracy and it's whatever is by the way. We wipe that out and then all our problems are solved. Meanwhile, we have developers who are sitting on thousands and thousands and thousands of existing approvals that they are not building. What's going on with that? Because I mean, it's like, again, the cities have had their timelines shortened. Everything can be appealed if you don't get it, if you don't hit it within your timeline. I mean, things tend to be appealed anyway if they're any size, because they'll go beyond the official plans. Mm-hmm. But then the developers get the approval, they've got everything they want, and then they sit there for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years not building. Do you think that does AMO think that that's really a part of the equation that needs to be looked at?
Absolutely. It is a factor. And I think some of the numbers that we've seen as recently as a few days ago is the number 285,000 units that are approved and not built. And so that gets into a number of things about the supply of land and the Greenbelt proposal, and the suggestion that instead of looking at the Greenbelt, perhaps looking at some of those units and better understanding where it is that they sit, and working on those pieces of it. But you're right. I think there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that, quite frankly, municipalities are on the hook for, being the implementer of some of these things, when in fact there are many different factors. I would also say currently there's 156 open planning for planner jobs right now across Ontario. And so it gets also to the point of where's the supply going to come from, not only of the building materials and the land itself, but who's actually going to process those applications. So that's something that we're very familiar with, and trying to also advocate for additional staff and resources at our municipalities to do those.
I mean, to an extent, this is a question for the development industry rather than for AMO, but do you think do developers have a motivation to increase supply to such a degree that they reduce house prices? Do you think?
I don't know. As not a developer, I can't.
I'd say it's a slightly unfair question for you.
I can't speak to that, unfortunately. I'm not. But I would say that I think the province's housing affordability task force report that came out did suggest that land itself was not the issue. The supply of land was not necessarily directly involved in increasing the supply of housing. But I know a lot of our municipalities work quite well with developers, and so whether that be the 6 months extension that was provided under Bill 109 for those gradual fee refunds, we're choosing to focus on the positive and moving forward, and hoping that some goodwill through these changes in the legislation that now we have to implement is now understood by the rest of the sectors, and they can help us out as well.
I just wanted to dive in quickly on that phrase "kept whole," because that's quite interesting, isn't it? So that basically you'll be kept whole. You're not going to be in a financial difficulties because of the loss of development fees. And the condition, if I understand rightly from what you said, is as long as cities meet their development targets. How first of all, how are those targets kind of judged, and when? Because if it's contingent on hitting a target, then when then that means the city's not going to get its money until that the test has been held, so to speak. So how do you think that will actually work in practice?
Well, I think that remains to be seen, and I think the given that this letter sort of just came out a couple days ago, I think the first piece that we need to look through is, and I know municipalities are already starting to do this, but the ones on the list, how realistic are those numbers based on true fact and historical data? I know each individual municipality has those and are sort of working on those, while at the same time bringing new councils up to speed, right? As the organization that represents elected officials as well, there's a lot of onboarding as well that staff have to do. So I could imagine that it's sort of top of mind for them now that they've tied this funding to the housing targets. But in terms of who I haven't heard very much about the accuracy on either one side or the other. I think it's still a very open question.
I wanted to touch base a bit on the relationship between the municipalities and the province, because I can't think of any municipality in the 905 that I've read that has said, "Yay, this is just what we needed." Most municipalities have cited the shortfall in funding opportunities and basically the insertion into the Greenbelt and the taking away of powers of conservation authorities to get this thing put through. And I may look old, but I'm not that old. And I remember back in the 90s, the Tory government then downloaded a lot of responsibilities onto the municipalities that municipalities were not happy with. And they spent a lot of time trying to figure out a way to give those responsibilities back up to the province. And I'm wondering, kind of twofold, like, are we seeing a repeat of that? Somewhat, downloading the cost of development onto the municipalities and then saying to the municipalities, figure it out, make it work for us, and we're just going to cram this through. And is that harming the relationship between the province, between Queen's Park and the various municipalities in the 905 and Ontario as a whole?
So I think what I would say is that the relationship between the province and municipalities, given that we've existed for many decades and have been in the Act since 2005, it is a very important agreement to us. Do we agree all the time? Not, but that is the will of individual councils. And so in terms of the relationship changing, I think this is, again, not the first time that a bill like this has come through. I mean, this is the third Housing Supply Action Plan and the fourth bill that's come through. And so I think more what you're seeing is a frustration from municipalities to say there's a lot of change on the horizon. And just as sort of we're getting our feet out from under us, the sand seems to shift again. And so the reconciliation or the recognition that there is a lot of work underpinning each and every one of these changes is something that I think that's more the frustration I think that they're hearing from the province. And I'll leave it to the elected councils to put forward their thoughts.
Of course.
Yeah.
I was just, I mean, another element of this whole story is the kind of normal process of democratic legislation and decision making. First of all, that it seems to me that the municipalities in Canada are in a really difficult situation because they are in this odd situation where they are the famous phrase creatures of the province, and kind of from a legislative point of view, they have exactly the same kind of clout as the ministry as a ministry does, because the province can just, anything you decide can be overturned by the province pretty much. I mean, do you agree with that kind of perception that the in other countries, other levels of government can't simply do this the way that happens in Canada with municipal relationship with the province?
In Ontario, that is the case, right? Like we are the implementers of certainly provincial legislation, and so we have seen things change. We've seen sort of some of these changes even to Bill 23 come into effect, and so So as I can't speak to other countries, I certainly do feel like that has always been our relationship, is to try to put the best advice forward to the province about how municipalities run and the various roles that we have. I know elected councils are not only stewards, but they're advocates for their own residents, and so all we can do is sort of put our best comments forward and comment on legislation, and in hopes that that it informs future proposals or changes existing.
And Bill 23 has gone from, I mean, this is nothing. So there were my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that AMO was not invited to the legislative committee where this was, where in a normal course of things, you have committee stage where experts come in and they talk about the legislation and say, well, we like this, we don't like this. The legislation is then altered, improved, and hey, in an ideal world, you end up with a better act. My understanding that AMO was not invited, first of all, which seems unusual.
That's correct.
And the bill itself was introduced, it seems like weeks ago, and we've gone from bill to act in no time at all. I mean, this is a very major act that, like you say, affects 6 other pieces of major legislation. And it's kind of gone through the legislature at the speed of kind of rocket speed. Is that a good way to legislate, do you think?
I think I can comment on the timing of the fact that it was introduced towards the end of October, and I think I counted 25 business days, I think, from the introduction to its passage. In terms of speaking, I mean, we were fortunate to be invited to the legislature outside of the standing committee time to give a presentation, and then we felt that was very helpful, and our president and our executive director had provided the same comments that we would have at standing committee. But I think at the end of the day, we are the level of government that needs to implement whatever comes in as fast or as slow as possible. And I think the true test of good relationships between both levels of government is that these conversations don't just happen at standing committee, but certainly throughout the days and days, not only leading up to the royal assent, but obviously going forward, and how we position it well for our members, recognizing that it's reality. So,
and you'd hope, you know, before the bill was even tabled, you know, a major piece of legislation like this would go through months, if not years, of kind of consultations and discussions. I suspect I know what the answer is going to be, but did those happen as far as you're aware?
Well, there was, because the first piece of the housing continuum, if you will, was started in 2018. I think the province would say that they have been consulting throughout. They certainly have had conversations at certain things, but in terms of Bill 23, could not say necessarily the specifics of the bill in particular for that. But I think there is the province would say that there has been a lot of consultation, and I'm not sure if municipalities would agree on this particular bill, but here we are.
John Lorink, who writes often about sort of municipal things and kind of a well-known writer on issues of urbanism and things like that, he made an argument in Spacing magazine, which I thought was very interesting. He's like, well, you know, Toronto shouldn't be moaning about losing development fees when, you know, they have ways of raising money that they haven't been using. You know, they have the ability to put additional tax onto cars and things like this, and they cancelled that. I mean, does that argument actually hold true for other municipalities? I don't think, as far as I'm aware, other municipalities can't do that kind of thing, so they don't have those other. So they're really, you know, development fees are one of the, you know, there's direct tax and there's development fees, and that's kind of it. Yeah. Okay. That was a fantastically quick and succinct answer on that. But yeah, that's so. Toronto is so different in how it operates. That really, I think that's an important point to make.
I was just going to say, I noticed we're coming up on our half-hour time window, and I don't want to take too much of your time, Amber, because I know you have to go. Do we have a final question, Roland, or?
I could go on all day.
I know you could. That's what I'm saying. Do you have a final question?
Yeah. I mean, again, this is not a fair question to ask someone who's sort of representing AMO, because it's asking you to kind of make up policy on the fly. But do you think, would a world where the cities were actually trusted more to make decisions with fewer appeals, with less second guessing, if you like, of the rules, which are kind of the municipalities run by, would that not actually be better in the long run for a kind of smooth and non-confrontational kind of process with developers? It seems to me so much of the delay arises from this kind of contest that has to happen before a development can be built. Do you think that's got any validity to it?
I think the idea that municipalities are a mature order of government is certainly first and foremost our principle. I think over the decades, planners have done a really good job at taking on some of these responsibilities and using them in the best ways that they see fit, and obviously at the behest of the councils that ultimately they serve. And so I think what we've seen is this generational shift in the planning world in general. And so I think what remains to be seen in terms of what the changes look like across the spectrum is what does this look like, and how does this improve the system, be it appeals or the time it takes in processing these things. And I think I would leave with the fact that every level of government and the development industry needs to come together. There was a housing supply affordability plan implementation team that was municipally led and announced in August. And so I would, as a personal and also AMO would agree, that team was really a great vehicle to start some of these changes, recognizing that we all are we all serve the public interest and trying to get people that live in our communities homes across the full spectrum, right? Market housing is just one interest and one aspect. It's important, no less, but our communities are facing a lot of different issues coming out of COVID and certainly before that. So that's certainly our priority.
Okay,
thanks so much.
We'll leave that as the final word. Thank you very much, Amber, for taking the time to come on and have this chat with us about development, which is kind of what we do nowadays.
Well, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.